It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday, a quiet day, in a small town in Louisiana. The kind of place where people know each other, where children play outside, and where families try to build a life one day at a time. But on that day, something happened that would leave a permanent scar on the community and shock the entire nation. 8 children gone, 7 of them his own. The man at the center of it all, Shamar Elkins. Before the headlines, before the police reports, before the tragedy was described as one of the worst in the state's history, there was a life, a man, a father, a story that didn't begin with violence, but slowly, quietly, moved toward it. To understand what happened, you have to go back. Shamar Elkins was not always seen as a danger. Like many others, he lived a life shaped by responsibilities, relationships, and pressures that were not always visible from the outside. He served in the military. From 2013 to 2020, he was part of the Louisiana National Guard, a signal support system specialist, and later a fire support specialist. That experience, like it does for many, may have left marks that were not immediately obvious. Because sometimes, the battles don't end when the uniform comes off. At home, life was complicated. He was married, a father to multiple children, part of a blended family, where responsibilities were shared and tensions could easily grow. There were reports of conflict, arguments, accusations of infidelity, financial struggles, the kind of issues that don't always make headlines, but slowly build pressure over time. And then there were the warnings. 3 years before the tragedy, a moment that would later feel chilling. According to a woman who raised him, his wife had mentioned leaving him, taking the children, starting over. His response was not calm. He reportedly said, "If they try to leave, I'll kill you, the kids, and myself." At the time, it didn't seem real. It sounded like anger, like words spoken in frustration, words that people sometimes say without meaning them. Or at least, that's what everyone hoped, because no one expects that those words could become reality. Time passed. Life continued. But beneath the surface, things were not getting better. In February, just weeks before everything happened, there was another sign. Shamar Elkins attempted to take his own life. Afterward, he received medical attention. He was placed on medication. He began counseling through a Veterans Affairs hospital. From the outside, it looked like help had arrived, like intervention had begun. But sometimes, help comes too late, or not in the way it's needed most. Then came Easter, a moment that should have been filled with family, reflection, and hope. Instead, it became another warning. He spoke to his mother and his stepfather. He told them his wife wanted a divorce. And then he said something that would later echo in the minds of everyone who heard it. "I'm drowning in dark thoughts." His stepfather tried to reassure him, tried to calm him, tried to bring him back from whatever place he was in. But his response was different. Some people don't come back from their demons. That wasn't anger. That wasn't frustration. That was something deeper, something heavier. And still, life went on. There was no immediate intervention, no emergency action. No system that stepped in and said, "This is too dangerous to ignore." Because in many cases like this, the signs are there, but they are misunderstood, minimized, or simply missed. There was also a past, one that hinted at instability. Back in 2019, he had been arrested. He fired multiple shots at a vehicle near a high school, a serious incident, one that could have been a turning point. He later pleaded guilty and was placed on probation. And just like that, life moved forward again. But when you look back, you begin to see a pattern. Moments, warnings, signals that something was not right. Not one single event, but many small ones, adding up over time. And then came the day when everything would collapse. A domestic dispute. That's how authorities would later describe it. A simple phrase for something that would become one of the darkest moments in the community's history. Inside that home lived children. Young, innocent, full of life. Jayla, just 3 years old. Shayla, 5. Kayla, 6. Layla, 7. Mark Aiden, 10. Soraya, 11. Kidarion, 6. Braylon, 5. 8 children, 8 lives, each with a future that would never come. And inside that same home was a man who was losing control. What happened next would unfold in minutes, but the impact would last forever. The morning began like any other, quiet, unremarkable. No one outside that home could have known that within hours, everything would change. Inside the house, tension was already there. Not loud at first, not explosive, but present. The kind of tension that builds over time until it finally breaks. What started as a domestic dispute quickly escalated. Voices rose, emotions took over, and then something irreversible happened. In moments like these, there is rarely a clear line. No single second where everything shifts. Instead, it happens fast. Too fast for anyone to stop it. What followed was chaos, fear, confusion. Inside that home, children were caught in something they could not understand and could not escape. Authorities would later confirm that 8 children lost their lives. 7 of them his own. 1, a nephew. 2 women were also shot. One of them, his wife. Her injuries were severe. Multiple gunshot wounds, including to her face and stomach. She survived, but only after undergoing multiple surgeries. Another woman, someone who had a personal relationship with him, was also injured. In the midst of the violence, there were moments of survival, moments that would later feel almost impossible. 1 child and 1 adult managed to escape. They jumped from the roof. A desperate decision made in seconds. A choice between staying and facing something unthinkable, or risking everything to get out. They survived, but what they escaped from would stay with them forever. Outside, the situation was unfolding quickly. Calls were made. Emergency responders were dispatched. Police rushed to the scene, but by the time they arrived, the damage had already been done. What they encountered was a scene that would leave even experienced officers shaken. Lives lost. Children. A home that had become something else entirely. As the reality set in, the focus shifted. Where was he? Because the man responsible was no longer there. He had fled. And just like that, the situation turned into a manhunt. Law enforcement began tracking him. Time was critical, not just for justice, but to prevent anything else from happening. The search moved quickly. Every lead mattered. Every second counted. Then, the pursuit began. Details of the chase remain under investigation. But what is known is that it ended suddenly. Authorities confirmed that Shamar Elkins was found and pronounced dead following the pursuit. But even in that final moment, questions remained. Was it self-inflicted? Or did officers open fire? An investigation was launched to determine exactly what happened. But for many, that detail, while important, did not change the outcome. Because by then, the tragedy had already reached its peak. A community was left in shock. Families left in grief. And a question that no one could fully answer. How did it get this far? Because what happened that day did not begin that morning. It was the result of something deeper. Something that had been building for a long time. When the sirens faded and the streets grew quiet again, the questions remained. In the days that followed, the small Louisiana community struggled to make sense of what had happened. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices. Churches filled with grieving families. Candles were lit. Names were read. And 8 young lives were remembered. Jayla, Shayla, Kayla, Layla, Markaden, Soraya, Kidarian, Braylon. These were not just victims. They were children. Each one with a story that had barely begun. Dreams that would never be fulfilled. Moments that would never come. For their families, there are no words strong enough. No explanation that brings comfort. Only the weight of absence. And as the community mourned, another conversation began. Not just about what happened, but why. Authorities described it as a domestic dispute. A phrase often used, but rarely fully understood. Because behind that phrase are layers of pain, mental health struggles, relationship breakdowns, financial stress, unresolved trauma. In this case, the signs were there. Threats made in the past, a previous arrest involving a firearm, an attempted suicide, statements about dark thoughts. Individually, each moment may not have seemed enough, but together, they told a story of someone slipping, slowly, into a place that became harder and harder to return from. And this is where the conversation becomes difficult, because tragedies like this force us to confront uncomfortable truths. What could have been done differently? Who could have stepped in? And when? There is no single answer, but there are lessons. One of them is the importance of taking warning signs seriously. When someone speaks about harming themselves or others, it should never be dismissed as just words. Early intervention matters. Not days later, not weeks later, but immediately. Another lesson is the need for stronger mental health support systems. Access to counseling, consistent follow-up care, and community-based support can make the difference between recovery and collapse. For governments, this tragedy highlights critical gaps. There is a need for stronger reporting systems, where threats of violence are documented and acted upon. Better coordination between law enforcement and mental health services, so individuals at risk don't fall through the cracks. And more accessible, affordable mental health care, especially for veterans and individuals under severe stress. There is also the question of firearms. When individuals show clear signs of instability, there must be systems in place to temporarily restrict access to weapons, not as punishment, but as prevention. Because in many cases, the difference between life and death is access. But beyond policies, there is something deeper. Community, families, friends, neighbors. The people closest are often the first to notice when something is wrong. And while it is not always easy, speaking up, taking action, and seeking help can save lives. This story is not just about one man. It is about a system, a society, and the fragile balance between struggle and support. As time passes, the headlines will fade. The news cycles will move on. But for the families, for the survivors, for the community, this moment will never truly end. And perhaps the most important thing we can take from this is not just the memory of what happened, but the responsibility to ensure it does not happen again. Because behind every tragedy is an opportunity to learn, to act, to change, and maybe, just maybe, to protect the next life before it's too late.